Hey guys, welcome back to the Lou Perez Podcast. My name is Lou Perez. If you'd like to support the podcast, please head over to locals.com and join the Lou Perez community. thelouperez.locals.com. This next episode has been more than a year in the making. I've been trying to put this together and I finally did it. I accomplished it. Yeah. I have Corinne Fisher as a guest. Corinne is a comedian. She's also the co-host of the podcast Guys We Fucked and also Without a Country. And joining us is Greg Lukianoff. He's with the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education and the co-author of the book, The Coddling of the American Mind with Jonathan Haidt. It's a really fun discussion. We talk about cancel culture, free speech, body positivity, and I hope you enjoy it. And please enjoy it right now. Greg Lukianoff is the president of the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education, and Corinne Fisher is a hilarious comedian, also co-host of the podcast Guys We Fucked.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
I actually have one that's more related to the topics that we're talking about today. That's newer, but also that's the famous one.
It's related to the topic. A couple decades ago, you would have needed a First Amendment lawyer to make sure you could do that.
I love it. I've spoken to a litigator many times regarding that podcast. But my other podcast is called Without a Country, and that's with Joe DeRosa, and that's where we explore the news from the perspective of the extreme right and the extreme left, and we try to find some sense in the middle, and we discuss a lot of cancel culture and free speech on that as well.
Okay, I really messed up on that one, guys. Sorry about that.
No, it's you honestly, since the last time that we discussed possibly doing this, that didn't even exist. We're only 40 episodes in.
What do you mean you messed up? I thought that was great.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
You just didn't know existed, but I also didn't tell you. So
yeah.
And also just for full disclosure, for quite a few years, I was a monthly donor to the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education. So this is my way of kind of bribing Greg over here, but I haven't been a donor since COVID hit because I had a kid, and I figured with a child and a plague, I might need to save that few bucks every month, but I am planning on.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, on donating again. So it's a
and
great.
we thought things were going to quiet down because of COVID, and things blew up. We're getting more case submissions than we've ever gotten in our history in the past couple of months.
Yeah, can we talk about that? What's happening there? What do you think?
I would say that. For most of my career, and this goes to your podcast, Corinne, for most of my career, when people would talk about kind of like the culture war related to free speech on campus, I'd say that's absolutely part of it. Political correctness cases happen a lot, but an awful lot of them aren't all that ideological. A lot of them are just university presidents throwing their weight around, administrators who are not used to having anybody looking over their shoulder. But this summer, I think partially because, because the murder of George Floyd, absolutely, a moment to push for police reform. Unfortunately kind of mutated on campus into let's get people kicked out of school, let's go after professors we don't like, including a guy. His persona was a conservative bomb thrower, but I knew him since 2001. Mike Adams, after he got canceled, he killed himself in July. I'm going to be writing a little bit more about that because I knew this guy for a long time, and the way it was covered in the press was basically kind of like, it wasn't really saying he had it coming, but surely people were saying that on Twitter. So anyway, there was an ideological explosion over the summer, and I kept on saying, oh, great, let's push for, the following 5 things for police reform that could actually make the difference. And instead it was, let's find old texts that people sent when they were in high school and make sure that they get their admission revoked. And there's not a lot you can do there in that situation. And let's go after professors who say controversial things. And they're Charles Nagy down in Louisiana, I think. We've sent 126 letters, just this summer. It's been crazy.
Wow. And what I'm wondering is that happening? It seems like school isn't going on though. Like classes aren't necessarily taking place. Is this sort of like extracurricular activities now that people are just like, well, school's not really happening, so it gives me more time to research a possible mess up that my professor made or something like that.
It's a weird hodgepodge. Some schools are in person, a lot of schools aren't. We are dealing with very non-ideological cases as well that involve people, universities having kind of like ridiculously poorly enforced COVID rules, but some. I think something really weird happens to the way people think about the world and themselves when their online personality is their full-time personality.
Yeah, Corinne, how do you deal with that? Because so much of the stuff of your work that you put out is online and just transmitted out into the ether.
My online personality. Well, it's funny because people really don't understand even the notion of having an online personality anymore. They almost think like exactly everything that you do it, and which is especially odd as a comedian because I'm obviously sometimes doing a character, which I have to explain to even my own mother. I said if everything I wrote comedically on Twitter was taken at face value, I should be locked up and put in a mental institution immediately. But anyway. It's difficult. And kind of to piggyback off what Greg said, I feel like similarly to when someone gets cast on Saturday Night Live or gets a big opportunity that we see in something like Variety, probably a similar thing happens when you get to your new year in college and you get your list of professors, or you have a couple days, someone rubs you the wrong way. You start doing a little research the way you would on someone before you go on a date with them, and you start pulling up things. And if anything, if there's it's almost like we're all like journalists. And if we think there's a story with anything, we're going to start expanding with that on Twitter or Instagram. And certainly people like to do that with me. Like people will try to make stories off of like series of Instagram stories that I put out at 3:00 in the morning. If you say the wrong word, there's a lot of over apologizing in comedy. You'll even notice it a lot in like Netflix specials where someone will tell like a little bit of an off-color joke. And if the audience doesn't erupt in laughter, they'll then include an apology in the special. Doug Stanhope actually did it, like in a pandering manner, comedically in his last one, but they'll include the apology and go back and explain the joke that they just did. And it's so distracting and kind of going against what comedy is as an art form. So that's just a little bit of how I see it. But also, after the murder of George Floyd, the original like cancel that I experienced from 2015 reemerged. And surely I thought we have, bigger fish to fry than something that I said like, years ago. The people are dead. No one died when I did anything, but it reemerged. So I think not only do we see cancels happening more frequently, but we see them reemerging. And so that lends to the question, like, is there anything that you can do to in quote, apologize or get back from something that you said, a misspeak.
And it seems like that the easiest thing to do, rather than like change actual policy, like Greg was talking about, like here are 5 policy changes we can that if enacted would actually help with, police, citizen relations.
Sure.
It's much easier to just be like, oh yeah, let's Google Corinne with all these different tags and see what comes up, and we could get rid of her or something.
Right. We have actual politicians who are in charge of policies that determine whether someone lives or dies, and everyone's like just really hyper focused on jokes comedians are telling or not telling.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask Corinne, did you see our movie Can We Take a Joke?
No, I would love
you gotta
to
see it. It's something. It's kind of funny because it comes out of the Comedy Cellar, and I was invited to speak at the Comedy Cellar way back in 2012 about my then new book by Noam Dorman. And Lee Camp, who was the self-described like most leftist person on the panel, said he didn't like playing campuses anymore because he couldn't use his good material. And so we started doing this project where it was like initially it was going to be like, okay, I'm a big Lenny Bruce fan.
Yeah.
Basically, the premise is Lenny Bruce wouldn't stand 5 minutes on the modern college campus. And at first it was a 5-minute video, and then it was a 10-minute video, and then Ted Balaker got involved. And in 2015, we came out with this awesome, relatively low budget movie about cancel culture. And I think we might have just been a little too early, but you'd love it.
Yeah, that's funny that you say that because right before COVID hit, I have a BFA in directing. That's like what I originally went to school for before I went down this whole comedy path. And I was James Altucher, who wrote the famous article that New York is dead.
Okay, yeah.
He was financing it. It was produced by Aaron Berg, and we were supposed to do this whole documentary on cancel culture. That was going to be my first feature that I was directing.
Mm-hmm.
And now with everything that's happened, we feel like there's larger issues. It's still something to tackle, but it's also gone beyond comedians. So far beyond comedians at this point. It's almost just a regular part of our culture.
Yeah, maybe I think this is a good segue into talking about the coddling of the American mind, because you just celebrated it's the 2-year anniversary of the book that you wrote with Jonathan Haidt. First off, like, what is it like writing a book with somebody? Because how do you is it like a Lennon McCarthy sort of thing where like you do a chapter, he does a chapter?
I think you mean McCartney.
Excuse me. Not I meant Joseph
McCarthy would be
Joseph McCarthy.
Awesome
Everybody remembers. Yeah, everybody remembers Vladimir Lenin and Joseph McCarthy.
McCarthy. Boy, could those guys sing. What I was co-authoring, actually it was exactly like John said it would be, in that I did a lot of the front end stuff, and he did a lot of the back end stuff. When it comes to the way we finally phrased everything, that's overwhelmingly Haidt. Haidt, I have no, and I don't want to say this too loudly because I want to sell another book, but Haidt's a better writer than me. Like he can take a paragraph that I think is just, and that's my best prose, and that's the shortest way you could explain that concept. And then he figures out a way to say it in 10 words, and I'm like, oh, okay, I guess that's better. So I'd say that, at times it was frustrating. I was desperately trying to get it done before my second kid was born, and that didn't happen. But by that point, it was more Haidt towards the end. I wanted to make sure we added a chapter on polarization right at the end, because I wanted to make sure that was there, and we talked about how this goes beyond just campus. And we also had a lot of help. There's a reason why I put my acknowledgments page, on the website, because people from Fire helped. Pamela Paretsky was our chief researcher. I try to give, she actually was the one who coined the term safetyism. I had much lamer versions of it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, co-authoring with someone like Haidt, we got through it and we still like each other. That's pretty good.
That's good. And what is safetyism? Because it seems like that's sort of a running theme throughout the whole book.
I originally broke it into two different concepts, one that I called pseudo-safety, but they're kind of merged. Safetyism is when the idea of safety becomes a sacred value, where essentially when there's no cap on it. When something becomes sacred, basically what you're saying is there's no trade-off. Like you since it ceases to be rational, it's about absolute safety. And if there's nobody pushing back, you end up in situations where you're protecting kids from the kind of stressors that they actually need to start feeling competent in the world. And the reason why I coined pseudo safety, and John just thought it was too lame, was partially because I wish people would stop using the word safety for quote unquote emotional safety. Like if you mean discomfort, if you mean but don't co-opt a powerful word like safety if all you're really saying is this person makes me angry. It is honestly a lot of ways that people use this. So safetyism, is kind of an ideology and almost like a superstition, like essentially that there's no downside to absolute maximum safety, when of course there is. You can't actually have perfect safety and still be alive.
Mm-hmm. And in the book, there's a talk of like fragility as well, and sort of in particular how children are being sort of raised today, where they aren't being raised to be anti-fragile.
Right.
I guess that's the way.
Yeah. One of the great things about working with Haidt and the two of us working together is that we just we come from completely different backgrounds, and we come to the same conclusions about lots of stuff. And we both came into the book really wanting to have the concept of antifragility in there. This is a a concept that the really difficult and narcissistic thinker Nassim Taleb came up with. I'm terrified of him, so I shouldn't be talking smack. But yeah, I think he's unbearable.
He deadlifts a lot. He talks about how much he could deadlift online.
Yes, and his taste in food, and he thinks he doesn't need an editor when he desperately needs an editor. But he wrote this book called Antifragile, which is fantastic. I think he's a top-notch thinker. And antifragility is the idea that we don't have a word for things that require stressors in order to grow, and things that become stronger from stressors. And when you think about it, both the human body is antifragile. There's of course a limit where essentially like stressors will actually kill you, but within that you actually need them in order to thrive. And our intellectual system, in my opinion, is anti-fragile. It's Jonathan Rauch's idea of liberal science that essentially you need to knock around the ideas and to question them to actually get closer to something that resembles the truth. So what I think we're doing to a generation of kids is we're disempowering them. I never liked the title Coddling the American Mind. I fought it and fought it and fought it and lost and lost and lost. But I wanted the book to be called Disempowered because what I see is I feel genuine sympathy for these kids because like these sometimes are literally genius kids, but they're being scheduled from 9 a.m. or 6 a.m. to midnight. They have the everyday life stuff taking care of them way later in life than previous generations do. And what does that result in? That results in a kid who knows how to get into Princeton, but doesn't know how to do anything else. And that's depressing. That's anxiety provoking. That means you don't have a locus of internal control. And of course, this is going to result in a huge spike in depression and anxiety. It was just even bigger than John and I predicted back in 2015.
That's very accurate. I'm like, I'm just sitting here. I'm like, yeah, I don't know how to do my laundry or do my taxes, but I own a home in Manhattan. It's exactly. I mean, yeah, because it's like, I know how to run a business, but I don't have no idea how to like do these like very everyday tasks.
And not having that that sense of self-efficacy. That's a stressor. That basically makes you feel like in some senses that you're not capable in the world. And unfortunately, a lot of these parents, particularly the more helicoptery ones, they don't seem to get that what they're really saying, what they're really whispering into their children's ears is, I don't think you can really handle this on your own.
Mm-hmm. That does happen a lot. I feel like my parents actually, I think did. I just turned 35, so I think my parents did a pretty good job. But also, like you're in school and you're doing 87, extracurriculars. I was literally like leading the school play on the varsity baton twirling squad, editor
Nice.
of the school newspaper, and the yearbook. So it's like when is there time to learn anything else? I would come home and be I've been exhausted since I was in the 6th grade. Which is something I didn't even notice until during quarantine. The first 2 months were the best months of my life that I can remember. And then I started thinking like, when's the last time you really took a rest and stopped like hyper trying to succeed? And it was 6th grade, I believe. So,
but one of those things, and I'm 38, I'm a few years older, but I don't look at the younger generation and say like, oh man, I'm so much tougher than they are. It's I don't look at that. Oh man, I don't I don't take shit. Or, I'm not like that. But I just can't believe the amount of stuff that people that it seems like younger kids allow themselves to be just offended by, and that it'll just completely throw themselves out of whack. I mean, they're growing up. There were always times when I was gonna be pissed off at somebody else's opinion or something like that, or want to debate, but never but the thought of allowing it to sort of derail my own trajectory or my own mental well-being, I just can't imagine that. Like my heart actually goes out to kids that just can't handle that right now.
And to be clear, I probably don't say this quite enough, is that there's lots of positive things about Generation Z, and that was that was the conclusion we came to, was that there was a shift, there was a really dramatic shift on campus in the academic year 2013-2014, where suddenly students were demanding that people be disinvited. They were demanding new speech codes. It was the first time we heard of trigger warnings and microaggressions, outside of strictly academic circles. And one of the things that sort of piqued my interest was they were making kind of medicalized arguments for it, rather than like, I hate this guy's a bigot, this guy's got to get off my campus. They were saying, well, it will be psychologically, medically harmful to almost always these people over there if this person comes to campus. And that's what got my antenna up, because I'd been thinking for a long time, and this is the basis of both the original article and the book, that it's as if we are teaching the habits of anxious and depressed people to a generation of students and then being shocked that they're anxious and depressed. And this is how cognitive behavioral therapy comes into this, because I think parents to a degree, K through 12 to a degree, and college certainly, at least a lot of them, teach students to overgeneralize, to engage in binary thinking, all of these kind of things that if you practice them, you're going to be depressed and anxious. And then we act like, whoa, how did this happen?
Yeah, that really resonated with me, those parts of the book, because I'd never heard of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT specifically, but then I was like, ooh, catastrophizing.
It's
Oh,
everywhere.
I do that. Like if I have a phone call that's
Everyone does
coming
that.
up, and then it's like, oh well, somehow I'm gonna lose a testicle. It's going to be the worst. This phone call is gonna lead just me down a terrible road, and also the focusing so much attention on negativity than positive stuff. And Corinne, I don't know if you can like sort of feel me on this, but I'm very fortunate that I get to do comedy for a living, but yet sometimes I find myself like not being joyful, where it's like, here I am making jokes, making people laugh, and making a living doing it, but yet I'm not able to find the joy in it. And I
Well,
feel like,
historically, how many comedians do we know who are joyful
no,
in
I
their
know, yeah.
everyday life? I mean, that's not really a characteristic.
I guess it depends on what pills they're popping or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not on antidepressants, never have been, but I certainly feel like I'm one of the only comedians who isn't. And funnily enough, the first time, I never was in therapy my entire life, and kind of when I became a public person, because it was when I was 30 years old, which I think is kind of old to transition from complete unknown to hundreds of thousands of people knowing the most intimate details of your life. And that's why I went into therapy. That, along with the fact that, again, at the age 30 plus, I had the realization that I had a nice childhood. Well, I mean, I always knew I had a nice childhood, but I didn't know that was not the norm. See, I thought these cases of people, coming into the world with intense emotional trauma were a couple people whose stories we, would see in a Lifetime movie. But apparently I'm like one of three people I know in a large in a large circle of friends and colleagues who did not experience childhood trauma. And even when I say that, people will fight me on that, and it's like, so you're gonna it makes me go crazy, because it's like, oh, are you going to try to make me go back and find trauma in something I found no trauma in? And people will even say, well, you probably did have childhood trauma, but you're just maybe perhaps more resilient than others. And there is this culture of going back and kind of like looking through things, almost combing through things, looking for problems where there were none. Because I have no problem in like unpacking something that maybe has been like, weighing down your soul. But I do find my friends and colleagues going on this, journey almost for trauma to belong or to make excuses for things that are just fixable in your present life without, being mad at your parents for 7 months.
Yeah, it's almost like an identity marker in a way, where it's
Yeah.
like, if like, oh, you have a traumatic childhood. Okay, that's the new norm, and
Right.
now you get to. It's almost like you get a little bit more public cachet from being able to do it, where it's sort of like, in a way, it's more respectable, or something like
Yeah,
that.
and I mean,
Well,
obviously, there are people who went through a lot, and especially
Yeah.
in comedy, I've heard a lot of terrible stories, and then I've also heard a lot of things that's like, I think you probably should stop acting like a shitty human being and stop blaming that on trauma. You're 39.
And meanwhile, I read a book where I talk about how close I came to killing myself. So, and that's, and I decided I needed to be honest about that, because
Yeah.
otherwise these people, I don't think, would take me seriously. But there's something that we also take seriously in the book, which is the class difference, the economic class difference between what different groups experience.
Yes.
And there's something called adverse childhood experiences, and that's like abuse, alcoholism, like having these kind of things in your house a lot when you're a kid. And those are disproportionately experienced, unfortunately, by people in the lower socioeconomic class. And we make this distinction, to be clear, like we're talking about the kind of kids who end up at a lot of these fancy schools, and that's an entirely different experience. But there's a book called Our Kids by Robert Putnam that really does a good job of addressing how big the socioeconomic gap is. I do think, unfortunately, there is this kind of guidance almost to sort of like excavate things from your past that actually,
yes.
What's funny is I think sometimes people, and I think it's probably true that at least there's always someone out there who just wears it and doesn't really feel it. But what breaks my heart is that I think in a lot of cases people look back and thinking that there must be something in their deep unconscious that is creating these things, and they can talk themselves into panic attacks, depression, all this kind of stuff. And I think that it's incredibly irresponsible of a lot of universities to know that there's this huge uptick in anxiety and depression among their incoming students, and then to tell them, to teach them about an ideology in which they are, both oppressor and oppressed almost always, that there's nothing they can do about it. It's hopeless. You live in a fundamentally corrupt society that has no redeeming value, and the only thing you can rely on, as long as you have sufficient guilt and shame, then you might be kind of a good person. That's really messed up.
Yeah, and those kinds of ideas leaving academia and going out into the world. It's pretty crazy.
Yep. Yeah, well, I was gonna say, kind of for Gen Z, I see a lot of like, and I get it, like where you're living up, you're growing up in a world that's entirely internet based, which even me, Facebook really became popular when I was almost graduating college. So, and I can't imagine how that would have been to have in middle school or high school. There was already weird handcrafted websites where you could rate the hottest girl in your high school. So imagine if you had the platform that was way more functioning like a Facebook. But I do think, you're surrounded by the news. The news is always catastrophic. So that makes you feel anxious all the time. And then it's reinforced that you have to be politically and socially involved. And if you're not angry, you're not paying attention, as people like to say. And so if you feel like, you can't start an organization or organize a march, being openly angry and finger pointing towards people does count as doing something and being politically active. And when we call others out on their missteps, that takes the attention away from us.
Yeah. There was a quote that was attributed to Philip Roth, but I've never been able to figure out who actually said it. But the 90s was a decade when people started to believe that feeling bad was doing enough.
Wow. That's a good quote. And Corinne, how did your new podcast come about with Joe?
A lot of it was actually on my end. I had been dating during the 2016 election someone who during the course of that was a Trump supporter. Like when we started dating, Donald Trump running for president wasn't even a concept. So we were already dating. I was already in love with this person. He said he wanted to vote for Donald Trump. And I've always been someone who, even though I've always been, grew up in a liberal household and, left leaning for sure, I really have always found the left to be somewhat obnoxious in, stating that their opinion was right, because I don't think many Republicans wake up in the morning like trying to be a bad person. I think that's the whole tug here. We all rub here, not tug. Jesus, that's the rub here. We all that guys we fucked. It's hard to get out of your system. I'm like, also I went to bed at 6 a.m, so forming sentences is hard right now. But that's the thing. We all think we are right. We all think what we are doing is just, for the most part. I don't think there's that many evil people in the world, because, well, first of all, I think to be evil, you have to be quite smart, and most people aren't. But that came about. So I would read an article on something, and then he would read an article on that same thing in a Republican news source, and I would read it in a left-leaning news source, and it would be about the same thing, but there would be a lot of different details. And so if you're going into this and like say, I only read the Washington Post, I'm always going to get that perspective. And when you also look through the authors, a lot of times, especially if you're reading about the same types of things and that's your interest level, you're really only getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people's perspectives. So it's skewed the way they think and the way that their boss at that periodical wants them to think and tells them that they have to, lean the article that way. And so it's just about, kind of being the average American, but taking a left news source and a right news source and finding where the truth is and why there might be this whole, such a strong disagreement between two parties living in the same place. And they kind of get into that in The Social Dilemma, which I watched over the quarantine, how even your Google searches will be affected by how your computer and Google starts to learn how you think, and they can give you data that will just continually back up your way of thinking. And statistically, I knew that's true. I mean, I interned for Michael Moore. And so if we're talking about statistics numbers, you can always, mostly always, unless your, thoughts are completely crazy, you can always find a statistic to back up what you want it to back up. And I found that even with like things like rape statistics on guys we fucked, like you can make it seem a lot worse than it is. You can make it seem like it's not that big of a problem based on who did this research.
Oh, Greg, did you want to pop in there?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's so much to comment on. Yeah, you might want to talk to, okay, so we've got lots of things for Corinne. We should definitely talk about, we've been thinking about doing a follow-up to Can We Take a Joke, just because everything's gotten so bad.
Yeah.
I'd love to chat with you about that. When it comes to things related to sexual assault, FIRE has some really great lawyers who, including Samantha Harris, who's been with us forever, who's probably the top lawyer in this field, who deal with the situation on campus and about how people who are accused of ultimately harassment, but assault is somehow considered to be just an extreme form of harassment, which was kind of a weird move in the law. But Samantha works a lot with that, and if you know students who are accused, falsely, definitely, let me know about that. And finally, when it comes to the media situation, I have a blog called The Eternally Radical Idea that I just started up, partially so I can, for example, to have a workbook so I can say goofy things. So for example, I'm writing something about Fleabag and Noom today and how it relates to the future of freedom.
Wow. I'm very fascinated by Noom because so many people have been like, yeah, it's not nearly as good as Weight Watchers, but
I lost 45 pounds on it, man.
Wait, on Noom?
Well, I'm also a big behavioral psychologist.
Can you tell me about Noom? What is Noom?
Noom is basically an app on your phone.
Can they sponsor this podcast? Noom?
Potentially, yeah.
And put it out there?
It's an app on your phone, and it primarily starts you down the path of just counting your calories, but using volumetrics first, which is also brilliant because volumetrics, which basically just means eat food with high water content, with low calorie density. And that's the one they start with, which is brilliant because that's actually the one that has the best evidence behind it. And they go down and down and eat, and they do little tiny lessons all throughout the day. You can do them all at once. You have a coach that you can talk to. You have a community that you can bond with. I'm actually too much of a loner. I couldn't do that part. But research-wise, it's all just really well thought out. But the article is ultimately kind of like, wow, this is where we're headed. You add a little bit of artificial intelligence to this, even a relatively primitive one, and you could have a system that, for example, teaches people cognitive behavioral therapy, or it could teach Annie Duke's idea of decision hygiene. But then the next step is, wow, okay, what's going to happen when our phones can always tell us the right choice?
Yeah. And you lost 45 pounds?
45 pounds, yep.
Wow. And after losing that weight, how do you feel like day to day?
Awesome.
Yeah.
I feel, I had a tumor about a year ago in my jaw, which is one of the reasons why, I'm always going to be wearing a beard from now on, that had to come out. And it was pretty, they actually had to take a whole chunk out. I lost a nerve there and everything. Wow. And to be a year away from that and feel about as healthy as I've ever felt in my life, probably more, is a welcome surprise.
It's on the issue of weight, and you have stuff like the fat positive movements and that sort of thing, where it becomes where it's astonishing that, just telling someone, hey, you know what, if you lost weight and you exercise and you eat better,
Yeah.
not only is it good for your overall, bodily health, but it's
Yeah.
gonna have really good side effects on your mental health as well.
Yep.
And somehow it became evil to share that just I don't know, common
I
information.
have some sympathy for that, partially, like my I'm very close with someone who's obese.
Okay.
I'll just put it that way. And believe me, she knows that she has to change it. And the difference between knowing something intellectually and then figuring out how to do it is most of your life. So I get the sensitivity around that. But if someone gets in trouble for, cracking a fat joke, this was actually, we had a 2003 case at University of New Hampshire that I didn't realize was going to be so controversial because of the fat shaming aspect of it.
Mhm.
A student had posted, he was tired of people slowing down the elevator in his dorm. And when they were just not going up one floor, they were going down one floor. And he's like, for God's sakes, take the stairs. And so he wrote something about the average freshman girl gains 15 pounds in her first year. There's something you can do about that. Take the stairs. He made little flyers about it. He was kicked out of the dorm. He had to live in his car in autumn in New Hampshire. He was mandatory psychological counseling. He was sentenced to mandatory psychological counseling. He had to read like 12 books, write a approved apology. It was one of these things where they really threw the book at him. It was so bad that the Daily Show contacted University of New Hampshire to find out about that, and that's what got the university to back off. But that was as a First Amendment lawyer, that's about as easy of a case as I've seen in my life. But later on, even though I think I've defended much more controversial stuff, when we have female fans of fire, that's the one case that they tend to think, well, that was kind of crossing the line.
Yeah, well, I think just as a woman, you just hear that and you're like, this guy's an abusive boyfriend, like emotionally. Like it's just a weird thing to point out that even though statistically I'm sure it's true, and it is just kind of a lot of times it's easier in many ways for women to gain and certainly retain weight for lots of reasons. I would punch that guy in the face if I saw him.
I mean,
and I'm very I'm very conflicted about the weight thing. I've had so many experiences with it, and I also have been overweight. First of all, to become obese, it's very little. Especially, I'm under 5'4", and women under 5'4", like our whole body structure is actually different, and the way we lose weight when you are under 5'4" as a woman is actually completely different. So it's way harder. And first off, I had an experience where one of those women's magazines, like a Cosmo type magazine, was sponsoring a comedy festival I was on. At that time, I was 25 pounds heavier than I am now, which on someone of my height looked like a lot. Like I looked like a fat person in the face. And the doctor had certainly told me that I was overweight. And this is like my pediatrician had told me, when I was, because I saw that my pediatrician up till when I was 18, and then my OBGYN had mentioned it. So like doctors still have no problem telling you when you're overweight. And it always makes me laugh because you're like, Jesus, this is all you need to become obese. Like I understand why people have these bad feelings about their body, but I'm glad they told me because I do want to be healthy. And so at that time in my set, I literally had 10 minutes on my own body and like fat jokes about myself because it was the only thing I had control over at that time. Because no matter what I was doing, I just couldn't lose the weight. I used my fitness pal. I went on all these different kinds of diets, eating for your blood type. Nothing was working. I was working out all the time and just, it wasn't taking. And so I actually dropped off that festival because we got an email maybe 24 hours before we were supposed to perform that all these things that we weren't allowed to talk about, including like body image. And so I replied and I said, I can't talk about my own body. And the woman who was organizing the show said, listen, like she in the email I got, I wish I could remember it word for word, but she basically said, listen, I don't like being fat either. And I think it's not good. But this is just like, we can't talk about this because it will be triggering to the audience. So I now lost the control of being able to speak about my own body because it might be upsetting to others, even though it was my firsthand experience. And then, cut 2 years later, I was still having a lot of problems with my weight. And I would talk about it on Guys We Fucked. And I got so many emails kind of just saying, like, you're getting older, just like be body positive. This is just like what's happening. And I know how my body works really well. And I just knew something was wrong. And so after 2 years, I finally found an endocrinologist who was able to diagnose me with insulin resistance, put me on a keto-esque diet and a daily dose of metformin. In the course of like a month and a half, I lost 10 pounds, and it just kept dripping off. And what had been happening was, like, I was working out so much that I was gaining muscle mass underneath, but the fat wasn't burning off the top. So I was actually just getting fatter the more I tried to lose weight. But had I just, kind of celebrated my body and everything that everyone was saying, I would have never found the help that I needed. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about that. And also, if you look up statistically, if you want to kind of use woke culture's facts against them, to just be okay with being overweight, it is you can argue that it's racist, because if you go to the government's website, statistically the people who are suffering from obesity are more people of color, and it's killing those communities at a much higher rate. Because I always try to fight people on things that they would normally fight me from that angle, and so that usually works if you call them a racist. That works all the way around. Just white people calling each other racist always kind of works.
You could tell if Lou is sad, because sad Lou has abs. That's that, like, I'm one of those guys where I'm like,
same.
I'm sad, and then I lose a little weight. But I think it also comes down to I think when people hear about like trying to lose weight, they immediately think, oh, you're trying to look a certain way. As opposed to, so much of it is like, no, I want to feel a certain way. I want to feel better. My wife, she teaches bar classes. She teaches Pilates as well. And she has people of all different body types in her classes. And it's not one of those training systems, like one of those like, HIT training systems where you're going to get jacked. But it's like, no, you want to be able to move. You want to be able to, live your life and enjoy your day. And it's not necessarily about like, oh, you want to fit into, whatever size dress.
And this allows me to make a pitch for something that I really want to promote while I'm on here.
Noom.
Well, Noom, absolutely. I want to be a consultant at Noom. I think it's brilliant. But we did a documentary. Nico Perino, who's my VP of communications, he just took it on himself, used our video team, and made a documentary about the life and times of Ira Glasser. And this was the former head of the ACLU, and he was one of the guys who helped defend the Nazis at Skokie. And he took over right over that. And that was one of the reasons why I, became an ACLU guy when I was little. I was like, wow, you're that principled, that you'd actually be willing to do that. And so sometimes I give people perspective by being kind of like, yes, it's a fat joke, but also Nazis have free speech rights. Like, and you're misunderstanding one of the values of free speech that doesn't get enough coverage. Is people talk about marketplace of ideas, and maybe your idea is stupid. This keeps happening. It's kind of annoying. The marketplace of ideas, but ultimately, the most important value of free speech is just knowing what people really think and why. And if you take that perspective, you start to understand, I think, a lot more about the country. But anyway, Mighty Ira, it's amazing. Like, it doesn't look like a film made by a first-time filmmaker. It's just gorgeous, and the story is really compelling, and it shows, kind of like the what it meant to be kind of left of center when I was growing up was the ACLU model. What was the idea that we are absolutely unapologetically always pro free speech no matter what. And unfortunately, what I considered to be kind of like the dissident wing of that group, the academics, who really kind of wanted more control over speech, I think they've essentially won.
Yeah, I'm a friend of Nico's, and I got to see the documentary. And I think one of my favorite things about the documentary is the footage you have of the Nazis that that took part in that wanted to march through Skokie, and it feels like another world. It feels like it's definitely a different time period, but it feels like what planet is this?
Well, it's one of the things I actually love about, free speech. I remember actually walking by the Westboro Baptist Church without knowing who they were way back in like the 90s,
Mm-hmm.
And what was great, one of the reasons why I'm smiling about that footage about the actual Nazi rally is you get to see what a bunch of jackasses and idiots these guys are. And this guy's like running around trying to make sure his pretty little Nazi rally is going well. He's really critical of everybody. And I really, like, at one point I was cracking up because it felt like he wanted to shout, it's like, you're turning this Nazi rally into a disgrace.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's definitely not the the superior race was not on display.
Let the horrid people show their horridness. It's not nearly as persuasive as people think. And when it comes to free speech, like the Westboro Baptist Church, one of my favorite incidents of like how you counter this speech. The Westboro Baptist Church one time protested Comic-Con in San Diego, and all of the people, they come out like dressed like Bender with like kill all human signs, and like the nerds completely mocked these people. It just turned into a wonderful joke.
Yeah, and I think it was the comedian Lisa Lampanelli who did a thing where there was some kind of march or something like that, and she raised money like for a counter march and said, okay, for every mile that these bigots march, I'm going to raise money for an LGBT cause.
She gave like five. It's actually in "Can We Take a Joke?" The documentary we did, and I think it was for every person who shows up to protest this gay rights project, she would donate something like a significant amount of money. It was like $500 for every single person to something that promoted gay rights. So it was nice to turn that into a situation where the more I become, the more I'm going to spend.
Yeah, and I wonder just when it comes to and one of the things that I was attracted to with the ACLU, like I got to talk with Nadine Strossen.
I was going to bring her up. She's one of my absolute favorite people. I have all her books. She's been on Guys We Fucked twice already. Most interesting one. Well, because it's wonderful because, a lot of our listeners are, Gen Z age. And, so it's this constant struggle of like trying to explain to them like the value of comedy and like not getting offended when they come and see us live. And like, you can be someone who advocates for women's rights, but also like can take a joke about yourself because, what we noticed when we started that show was that feminism really lacks a sense of humor. And I think that's part of the reason sometimes we get caught up in ourselves. And her argument has always been like, one of the first things to go when free speech starts getting taken away is it actually hurts women and women's right to choose. And so she goes into that a lot. She's also defended pornography. She has a whole book defending pornography and freedom of speech. And she's just one of the most fascinating, wonderful people.
Yeah. One of the cool things about my job is I've gotten to become friends with some of my heroes. So like I'm friends with Nadine and I'm friends with Jonathan Rauch. And these are two of my all-time free speech heroes. And one of the things I love about Nadine is that she has no qualms whatsoever about talking about the sexual aspect about it. And even if it makes people uncomfortable, she's such a good representative. She can kind of like move the conversation over to how important this is for sexual freedom, and just in a way that is just so persuasive. Nadine's incredible. Her book, Hate, Why We Should Oppose It with Free Speech, Not with Repression, is probably the most conclusive. Like as far as like the best arguments that hate speech should be protected, almost every single one is in that book.
Yeah, and what I've sort of found is when it comes to free speech, if you are a big proponent of it, a big defender of free speech, it's almost like nothing else matters. For me, like to be able to have conversations or to hang out. There are so many people that I know where I have no idea what they think about economics. I have no idea what they think about policy and all that, because we just all we talk about is like, oh man, can you believe like they're trying to shut down this? Like, why would they do that? And it's sort of a weird position where I don't know what political labels mean anymore, because I'm like, all the people I get along with are, there'd be liberals in the 90s, and
And that's healthy. And I think we've reached a stage where we think that people who politically disagree with us are at some deep level evil. And it's a very elitist, upper class kind of way of seeing the world. It's classic. It's very Victorian. But it is sad, though, and of course, I have no problem also saying that Trump has, to say the least, polarized things even more, and made that more intense. The accelerants to a lot of this process, and I wrote a book called Freedom from Speech, where I talked about, I think the threats from freedom of speech to freedom of speech are going to go up as other things get better. As we have more technological options, as we can not have to live in centralized cities. I just think that it's a problem of progress, that essentially free speech will become more threatened as other things get better. But two things and I think this would have happened no matter what, even without higher education and either without social media, but social media made it faster, sped up this process. Higher education, which could be dampening it down, made it accelerate it as well. And I do think the 2016 election sent it into the stratosphere.
Yeah, I wonder, we are recording this before the November 3rd election. I have no idea what's going to happen between the 2 weeks,
Shenanigans is what I'm predicting, and that's why I live in DC. I live in downtown DC, and I'm getting out of Dodge for the election because I got a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I don't want to be here.
Have you had trouble dining outside without raising your fist in solidarity with the wretched of the earth?
I have yet to run into that. I'm the wrong person to demand I do something or say something. It's kind of funny because I think of myself as a relatively easygoing person, but when someone starts telling me exactly what to do, I can't. And my wife has seen this, and I was texting about this, and people thought I was saying I'd be brave in the face of this. I'm like, no, I physically can't take orders. Like some part of me is like, no. But I haven't run into that actually. Overall, outside of like what's going on near the White House, things have been pretty calm here in DC.
Oh, that's good. My agent, actually, we got some offers to travel to do comedy during election week, and he advised us not to travel. And like, if you know anything, I'm sure you have book agents, and agents, if they're telling you not to actively make money, like, wow, in my entire profession, that's never happened.
How has New York been? Because definitely, like, the coverage makes it sound like it's been terrible. But
of course. I mean, I think you see like more homelessness, more drug use in near Penn Station and those locations. But other than that, it's just more like a street fair vibe. It feels more European. I live in the East Village, so just like a lot more outside. And, there are more homeless people, but it's not like this violence and chaos that the news would have you believe. Because like people will reply to me on Twitter and be like, how can you still be in New York? It's like, there were months here when it was actually the most pleasant it's been because all the people who shouldn't be here to begin with left.
and also it comes down to, I think, depending on where you are situated in New York, so it's like I'm in Brooklyn Heights. The promenade is still there. Although people have been leaving a lot of weird shit on the promenade. Some guy's been doing leaving behind, I guess, like a makeshift hookah. Just like on the promenade, and I'm like, what's going on?
Ooh, free hookah.
Yeah.
The worst thing to do during
cut through. It's like a cut up Mountain Dew bottle or something
public
like that.
Hookah.
Yeah.
But what could go wrong?
Yeah. Corinne, so we have only like a few minutes. What's it been like, doing comedy? Have you been able to get up a lot and do live comedy?
Yeah, I mean, certainly not as much as I had been. I would say like pre-pandemic, I was doing, when I was in town, about 15 shows a week. And these are like, low paid or no paid shows sometimes. And now it's probably down to like 3 spots a week. So very difficult to write new material because you just don't have this, polishing process, to be able to do like, 3 sets on Friday, then 3 sets on Saturday. I would usually, show up on Monday with 5 new minutes of material. So I don't have that luxury anymore. But comedy, honestly, as far as like audience reaction, I feel like has been a little easier because people realized how important it was in their lives when it was definitely taken for granted before. So I think when all you have to do next time is lock people in their homes for 4 months and then they appreciate comedians. We are definitely the most underappreciated, disrespected of the art forms because everyone thinks they can do it because it's just, getting up there and, everyone's made their friend laugh before. I understand the concept. And then, I also recently started doing road work. So I was in Tempe, Arizona last week. And I remember when I was surprised by how safe and responsible everyone was being as far as wearing masks and social distancing and being clean, really pleasantly surprised. And again, people just trying to laugh and get things back to normal. It was a good experience. Obviously, comedians are a little sloppier than we normally are, but audiences have been patient. So with me reading out of my notebook crazy thoughts that I had alone.
There is something real about the the live element of being able to sitting in a room of people and watching a person do their thing live that I really hope that we don't lose that. I really hope that our consumption of comedy or any other kind of artwork is just sort of relegated to whatever screen you have in front of you, because I feel like in the same way that it's sort of helped kind of a little breakdown of social graces. I think it'll I just hope we can get that back.
I think there are a couple things that you just can't do on the internet. Even in film school, I went to the School of Visual Arts, and one of our professors would often talk about the importance of watching film in a theater and being around other people's reactions. And I'm a big horror film fan. And I think especially for horror movies to, get that sense of, impending doom, sometimes you do need to be in the darkness surrounded by others. Like that's how those films were made. And it doesn't hit the same way when you're on your couch, periodically looking down at your text messages because you're too distracted. There's lights, there's, your real life is there. And there is a certain beauty in turning your phone off, for 90 minutes to 2 hours and going into this other world that a director has created for you. And the same is that, some of the most brilliant minds in comedy have made comedy specials where I was like, and it makes me so disappointed because so many people have never experienced comedy live. People don't think of going to a comedy show the same way that they, say, let's catch a movie tonight or let's go to dinner. I've never seen anyone's taped comedy special that captured how good they really are on stage.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Cool. Any last words?
Before we die?
I have to be a good boss at fire. So I would say three things. Definitely check out Can We Take a Joke? Ted and I are thinking about making some kind of follow-up. Ted is actually working on a documentary about coddling and the American mind.
Oh, cool.
Check out Coddling the American Mind. I'm extremely proud of it. It's still selling like it's a new book, which is amazing. And definitely, Mighty Ira. I got three things that I'm just super duper proud of, and I think they do a good job of explaining why free speech is so important to a younger generation.
Cool. And Corinne?
So I have two podcasts, guys. We fucked the anti-slut shaming podcast. It is exclusive to Luminary now, but there's like 6.5 years of free archival content that you would have to work your way through to even be ready for that. So you're good. And then I also have Without a Country with Joe DeRosa. That's lives on Gas Digital, but always available for free as well, wherever you listen to podcasts. And that's probably, most interesting for people who were tuning into this show. And then just, support live comedy. I know you probably hear it a lot and it sounds like nothing, but to go and watch a comedy show and not raise your hand in the middle and say that you disagree with a joke, it really means the world to us.
How dare you, sir?